We are now live for our fabulous tribute to Feisty, Fabulous and 50 plus women who choose to challenge sexism and ageism. I would like to acknowledge that wherever we meet today, we meet on the land of Aboriginal people whose sovereignty has never been ceded. I recognise and thank them for their custodialship and acknowledge the elders both past and present. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Julie Ankers, the amazing volunteer who has started up a Blue Mountains own group in February. Julie has put together this panel of amazing, inspiring women and who will discuss what does it mean to be 50 plus and remain fabulous in a world that does not seem to recognise older women. So much has happened in the past fortnight, which has made us really think whether we've moved forwards or not. No doubt Julie and her panellists will share their thoughts with us. So please welcome Julie, who will introduce the panellists. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev, for the introduction. Good morning and welcome everybody to this morning's special International Women's Day webinar, with an enormous thank you to OWN for organising this celebratory event, with a big shout out to Yumi Lee, OWN's New South Wales manager. Today's topic is Choose to Challenge Sexism and Ageism. And on our panel, we have 4 women whose stories are featured in 2 of my books, Feisty, Fabulous and 50 Plus, and Bold, Brave and Bloody Brilliant. We have writer and editor Kerry Chater. Kerry, do you want to weigh?
Just
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Blue Mountains Rural Fire Service Communication and Liaison Officer Sandy Croker. Educationalist, film and theatre director, art curator and traveller Jo Miley.
Hi.
And business executive and board member Ching Mei Maddock. I'll begin with you, Kerry. First question, how do you think the experience of being an older woman has changed from your grandmother's time to this present day?
It's interesting because I actually had not only 2 grandmothers, but 2 great grandmothers who were always dressed in black and very, always seated, is my memory of them. But with my grandmothers, it's very interesting. We perceived them as being old and needing to be cared for. And if I reflect, when I was growing up, they were in their 50s and 60s. And, we had that perception that they needed to be cared for and looked after. And there were a few things that really stood out. I mean, one was none of the women in my family could drive until my mother learnt to drive. And then she was taught because it was going to be useful for the business, no other reason. But being able to drive, not being able to drive, was a huge disadvantage. Work, they didn't work. One of my grandmothers worked during World War II, and that was a huge liberation for her. And she worked then until she retired. So, but the other grandmother, her husband kicked her out when my father married. So she was then in her early 50s. Now, after that, she needed to be cared for. She never worked. She became totally dependent on the rest of the family to look after her. So that male domination was an extraordinary thing and a huge change from where we are now. Like, we would always visit my grandparents. My kids now expect me to go to them. So I'm in my late 70s now. I drive, of course. My closest family is in Sydney, 2 hours drive away. Just had an email from my son this morning. Oh, Mum, can you come down for Poppy's birthday in a couple of weeks? That's the expectation. But can I also say that those grandmothers and great-grandmothers were also, they were strong. And I remember that strength. I had a great-grandmother, Ma Cameron. She was Scottish, very Scottish. And she always said, I will never, never receive a telegram from an English queen. And she died when she was 99 years, 11 months and 1 week. And the family always reckoned she died in spite. So there was strength there. And that strength came through in the family. But the biggest things really that I experienced that they didn't have is the pill. able to choose when and how many children to have and so on was something they did not have. They were not able freely to work. They didn't have financial independence. And little things like, I love eating out. You know, I don't remember, well, until they were quite old, I don't remember my grandparents, both male or female, just eating out for the sheer pleasure of eating out. You know, our lives have changed enormously since that time.
Thanks, Kerry. Ching Mei, what
Yeah.
about you? Yes.
I'm never knew my both sides of grandma. However, I have a very strong grandma step grandma, and she's the figurehead of the whole family, and everything. She's the one who had to make decisions, which is quite different. So I have a very strong kind of model like her to, grow up with my mother, and, surrounding all these interesting and supportive and strong figurehead women.
Right. And Joe, what about in your family?
Well, I knew both of my grandmothers. I didn't know either of my grandfathers. They'd both died before I was born. And I remember them as these incredibly strong women. Both grandmothers were from Tasmania. I used to get sent down, and I attribute this to my love of traveling when I was 5 years old, to stay with my grandmothers. And I remember being shocked when my father's mother, Selena, would eat peanut butter. I thought, too old to eat peanut butter. How she likes peanut butter sandwiches, like me. I have a very vivid memory of that. I remember her hair was still dark, She was a very, very strong woman, and they both survived without their husbands. I know they didn't work. I know neither of them had the sort of financial independence that I have, but they were born in the times, or they lived in the times of the first wave of feminism. Edith Lyons was the first parliamentarian in Australia from Tasmania. So I like to think that my grandmothers had a part in this change in history. They were formidable women, and along with my mother, I stand on their shoulders.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Joe. And Sandy, last but not least, what about?
Well, both my grandmothers I remember as small and old. And again, I guess I was in a very white middle class area. They lived in a very white middle class area. So there wasn't a great contrast, except for the family next door who were Jewish and was Russian and German, and they were wonderful as far as I was concerned. They were very different. But they were almost invisible women. I only remember one grandfather, and when he died, my father took over my paternal grandmother's finances. On my maternal side, she was a sweet little old lady, and my two aunts looked after her. And when I look back on some of the things that I guess Kerry has said too, I remember them being less mobile. They never drove. And the other thing that I feel very strongly about these days is that they didn't talk much about family history. And of course, being a child, and them in their 80s and then dying when I was in my teenage years, I didn't have the wit to ask them about the family history, because there certainly was some scandals in the family and nobody talked about them. And I kind of knew bits and pieces. And it seemed to me that was their job, was not to talk about these things, to smooth it all over. Yes. And to me, this is what makes families who they are, is these extraordinary things they've had to get over. And so, yes, they're almost invisible to me, my grandmothers, yes.
So do you think that they, in some ways, they had it better or a lot worse than we do today at our ages?
Well, I don't know. They didn't complain. So I can't really make that assumption. They never complained. They were happy in their role. They were cared for. They were looked after by family. And I think they had no more expectations than that.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Right. So when you were growing up, what struck you about the differences between girls and boys in how they were treated? Do you think much has changed? We'll start with you, Jo.
Well, I'm the eldest of 6 children. I have a sister and 4 brothers. And when I was thinking about this question, the only thing I remember is the boys were allowed to do more. They're allowed to go out on their own. They're allowed to be braver. When one of my cousins was taking us, we were in Melbourne, to Luna Park, he was only going to take the boys. And I was furious. I didn't understand why me, who loved Luna Park more than anyone else, was not allowed to go. And there was also an expectation, because of this large, being the eldest of 6, that my sister and I would look after the children. And we did a lot of that. And I remember hiding in the wardrobe once when one of my brothers ran down a backyard and ran over a tap and impaled himself. And I thought it was my fault. I'd done it. And I'm sure that this affected my decision not to have children. I saw what my mother went through with 6 children. I did an art piece for the high school certificate, a sculpture of a sort of a female figure with children hanging off her like a raccoon. I so admired her and how she brought us up, but they just had more independence and we had more responsibility.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
May's nodding her head, yes. So what do you think, Ching May?
Yeah, I'm also eldest in the 4 kids growing up, and I think, and I only have we only have one boy. You know, we all pay a lot of attention to him. You know, try to make him to, you know, like grow up to be a nice young man or whatever. But the responsibility definitely falling to the girls, especially me, eldest. And however, my father is always very supportive of girls as well, which is really good to see. And I think we definitely have a different kind of a view towards how we see boy or girl in terms of, you know, we growing up as such. Yeah.
And Kerry, you're one of 2 sisters, so you didn't have any brothers. How was it for you?
Yeah, so once again, I'm the elder in that case, because there were just 2 of us. I did have male cousins, but went to an all-girls school, and I've got to say they were incredibly supportive and encouraged us academically and to go on to university. And, you know, I got all of that encouragement in the world and at home as well, because my mother, who had to leave school at the end of year 8, if you can just imagine that nowadays, when she was 14. I mean, I've got a grandson who's 14, and I told him that, and he couldn't quite believe the notion of having to leave school at the age of 14. So she was always incredibly pro education as well. But also, I also had a lot of natural self-esteem, and I think that was reinforced by my family. I had great love. I was so fortunate. Parents, grandparents, I had great love. But I was also what was called in those days a tomboy. And so I used to do, even though I was the girl, I was participating in all of the sports with the blokes. So cricket, I played cricket with my father and grandfather and male cousins. If I look back, none of the other women took part. None of the other girl cousins or, you know, parent or, you know, other women in the family, which, you know, I didn't even think of before I started reflecting on this. Later on, I played squash, and I used to play with my father's friends who were all males. My grandfather taught me boxing, which was really useful at one stage when a guy tried to grab me in a park in Melbourne, and I gave him a quick 1-2 from my grandfather, and he doubled up in pain and took off. So, you know, I didn't feel anything in the slightest when I was growing up, but I became aware that I felt my mother was put down in many ways. She wasn't allowed to take an official role in the family business, even though she worked her heart out for it, but it was never allowed to be official. When I was at university, I was given a DJ's card. And then I found out that my mother was not allowed in her own name to have a DJ's card. So I ripped mine up. I wasn't going to have it if she wasn't allowed to have it. One of my first inklings that there perhaps was a perception of difference was my paternal grandfather. When I was at university, I did economics, virtually an all-male faculty, which I loved. Going from an all-girls school to an all-male faculty was great fun. But my grandfather, I was going into the honours school, and my grandfather begged my mother not to allow me, or not to let me, to do the honours year because it was too much for a girl, and she'd become a blue stocking. And my mother, I remember, told me very tentatively, because she knew what my reaction would be. And did I do the honours year? Yeah, of course I did. Yeah, of course. But yeah, that was my first little inkling around that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kerry. And Sandy?
Well, I'm an only child, so no brothers, no sisters. So I had to think about this one. And it was probably, I was thinking of mum and dad, and I probably was more interested in what my father was doing. I mean, he loved sailing. He liked the idea of flying. He was sort of an adventurous sort of person. And my mum found this difficult because I remember we bought a yacht and it was fantastic. And the idea, he thought he'd like to sail around the world. So that was interesting. And then he bought my mother a book on sailing around the world, and there were monstrous waves. Well, you know what she said after that? No way. So, but it was this sort of adventure that I enjoyed. I know my mother, but my mother was always trying to encourage me to do activities that had social implications, like you might meet the right boy. I was far more interested in boys on motorbikes than I was the right boy. And so it was interesting. So I had this more outdoor aspect about my personality. And of course, that led to riding and surfing. And I remember my mum was absolutely terrified of me wanting to ride. And so I suppose at this stage, I started to become a bit of a rebel. And I found I could ride horses in the zoo. I could actually climb over the fence. And I encouraged my friends to do this as well, because we're all mad keen on horses. And I would climb over the fence and we would ride these horses. They were probably for meat for the lions, but of course we weren't quite didn't know all that at the time. And we used to take the carrots, and my mother used to wonder where all the carrots were disappearing to. And eventually, when it was found out that, fortunately, one of mum's friends said to me, I think you better let her go riding properly. This is not a good way of doing this sort of thing. But it was interesting because it actually led to one of my first social work acts. Because, I suppose we're all about 12 or something doing this sort of thing. And there was one particular horse we particularly liked. And we didn't want this to happen to this horse. So the zoo was privately owned in those days by Sir Edward Holstrom. So we wrote to him. And we actually never got a reply, but that horse was sold to somebody else. And I thought that was really interesting. So it inspired me in the sense that I could do something about things. And I think that's what, so I didn't have a sense of difference. I just had a sense that I could do things. And it didn't really matter what I wanted to do. I could probably do it if I tried hard enough. So that's all I can say about that. So, yeah.
But do you think things have changed a lot?
Yes, I do. I don't. For some people, it depends on where you live, what group of people, culture you're talking to. Doing social work in the UK, working with Pakistani families, there was an obvious difference of what was expected of the boys and what was expected of the girls. And we're talking late 1990s, 2000. So it was still there in different cultures.
And Jo, sorry, go on.
And I'd also say in working class families in the UK, there was this expectations that girls would go and work and find someone to marry, preferably rich. And so there was still this expectation of where women's lives lay, shall we say.
Right. And Jo, do you think that's still the case?
I I'm sort of, it's a bit of this and a bit of that. I know that my ancestors, the women ancestors, faced huge challenges. They went through wars and depression. You know, they faced, in a sense, tougher situations than we do. It's a bit hard balancing the, you know, saying which problem is bigger than the other. I know that they changed the world so I could do what I do. I know that they did that. And I hope that what we do and our stories will help change the world and support the younger women today who are starting another revolution to change the world, to make things better for women. So yes, it's changed incredibly. And yes, some of the battles are still the same.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
I was tremendously inspired by some of my teachers in my high school.
Mm.
They were the women that inspired me, that things could be done. There was one woman there who trained as a bullfighter. That was a bit different. Then there was another woman who was in the Land Army during the war. And so listening to her stories. There was another lady who was English, and she in the war, she was in the mechanical corps. So these were and then another woman who came here, and she had been an actor in the Globe Theatre. So these people really, I think they had a great influence on me. You know, again, an all-girls school, but the teachers were interesting and inspiring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Kerry.
I found a similar thing. Some of the teachers were amazing role models. I went to what was essentially a Scottish school. We had one English teacher who'd been through the Blitz in London and told us extraordinary stories about that. And another teacher, Judy Rathbone-Lawless, you know, from the Rathbone family, who was, you know, a quite inspirational person, just in terms of her achievement and what she did. And I visited her later in London and found, which we never really knew at school, that she loved smoking a cigar. And, you know, she was, you know, quite extraordinary. When I came across, she asked me, you know, did I smoke? And I said, no. Well, would you bring me your duty-free consignment of Players untipped filters, please? It's amazing.
Well, let's move on to when you started work. Did you aspire to a career? And also, were you subject to sexual harassment, which is very, very much in the news at the moment? So why don't we start with you, Qingmei?
I never knew what I want to do. And but I always very upfront about different things. For instance, I like to organize some events in my neighborhood when I was little. And the other thing is, but I'm very lucky because I'm surrounded by so many interesting, inspired women as well as men, and supportive enough. So gradually it's just tumbling, you know, to do what I'm doing, and through different kind of ups and downs in life, like we all do. And I think it's important that we do have inspired mentors in our life in different stage. And so I just keep doing what I'm doing. And I think I can help other younger women in terms of across different cultures, as well as because I choose to come to this country, and I think everybody should make effort to understand, to stimulate, or to integrate into this society as such that we choose to be in. And I think we can bring different kind of cross-culture understanding about the global view, which is that's what I'm trying to do today. And I hope I can also help other younger women.
Can I just ask you, though, when you finished at university and started working, did you find, were you sexually harassed at all? Did you have men, you know, being, you know, hitting on you is the expression?
Well, more or less, yeah, have a little bit, but it's not really in such a great deal, because I have to because I also had to learn how to be assertive enough, say no, because sometimes in my culture, we are so polite, we try to be reserved about how we feel, how we do things. And so, yeah, I have to learn and to say, hey, that's enough, and, you know, no more or something like that. But again, I'm lucky enough, and I've been surrounded by very supportive male, as such, my late husband, etc. And I think it's up to ourselves, because we're so conditioned with our own upbringing, and we have so many we make so many conditions. But again, we start to peel out this unnecessary is not belong to ours. They make today's we, me, etc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Joe, you're looking there agog, you're waiting.
Yes, well, my mum taught us how to earn our own money. So, and I always had confidence in getting another job. In these economic times, it's harder for women. So, and also I had 4 brothers. So and yes, there was sexual harassment, and yes, they did hit on me. But I had 4 brothers, and I was older than them, and I knew they were little shits. But, you know, and I could, like Chingmei, I was taught assertiveness, and I could, you know, well, I had assertiveness brought into me straight away. The courage to go out and ask for another job, the courage to tell people to stop it. But in my career, I mean, in very recent part, in the last full-time job I had, the human resources manager in a government department was sacked for sexual harassment. Because a very brave young woman, he'd been doing this for years, and a very, very brave young woman stood up. So, you know, I know it's going on a huge amount. I know it hits people differently. I thank my mother and if you like, my brothers, for letting me learn through them. You know, I think, you know, there's always jokes and always creeps, and sometimes you can fend it off and sometimes you can't. You're in a difficult, you're trapped. As I heard someone say, you know, at work, you're trapped at work. You can't get out. You're stuck there. So I feel for my young sisters in the community, you know, that are going through this. And I have such admiration for their courage and for their anger. And I hope that they channel that anger and keep up the pressure, because it's gobsmackingly tragic. Yeah, it shouldn't be happening anymore. Anyway, and men need to step up and change, utterly change. It's not us that have to change, it's the men that have to change. It's not our fault. Anyway, yes. It's been triggering this week.
Well said. Yes, well said. Yes, I suppose beginning, I probably didn't have that sort of confidence. I passed my leaving certificate and probably didn't really quite know what I wanted to do. So I approached the RAAF, and of course, basically they wanted women to be in admin in those days, and I wasn't very good at admin. I don't spell very well, and I could see that this wasn't probably, I mean, I wanted something, well, I really wanted to fly, but I certainly wanted something more outdoor. So at any rate, because I'd done chemistry and physics, I was encouraged to join CSR, which was quite extraordinary at the time. And and I'm amazed at myself these days that I accepted it. But in those days, the male intake were sent to university, and the female intake was sent to TAFE if they wanted to. So that was quite, and then a friend of mine, Christine, who'd won a Commonwealth scholarship and wasn't going to be sent to university, put up her hand and made a fuss, and she got to university. But it was extraordinary that there should have been, well, again, the thoughts were, I suppose men were going to continue to work for CSR all their lives, as one did in those days, and the women would get married and have babies. that was the thoughts in those days. So that was quite an extraordinary thing. I sort of talked about sexual harassment. It happened, but I remember because there was a big intake of us, so we weren't all by ourselves, and there was the intake that was ahead of us. The comment was, he's like that or she's like that. And I think that referred to that sort of sexual innuendo, or touching you up and things like that. And I remember we were all very kind of protective of each other around certain people. You wouldn't be kind of left by yourself, because you could often be in a laboratory, by yourself, and this person appeared and suddenly one of your colleagues appeared also. So there was no way, as you say, Jo, there was no way to call it out safely. And it was kind of like, blokes are like that. And, and that, I think, is something that has to change. Blokes don't have to be like that. Blokes can be respectful and still be great. So it's really, and I just think it's amazing that I see two young women currently in the news for all the wrong reasons, but they're being so wonderfully brave. And I hope that younger women can see this and think that there's a way forward for them, which is really important.
Yeah.
And Kerry.
Oh, look, it's great stuff. Look, I always wanted a career. I always knew that. And funnily enough, one of the big problems that developed between my ex-husband and me was, I made it very clear when we were talking about getting married that I wanted a career. And that's fine. But he later said, I thought you would change your mind once you had children. So, that sort of expectation, it's like, going along with a female, but really, she's going to want to be, she'll be different. She'll conform to everyone else. When we were first married, the wives, he was a dentist, the wives in the was a country town, local community, had a stall on a Thursday or something. And I was told, I was expected to be part of the rota. And I said, well, actually, I work. Now, ex-husband was so embarrassed that he paid them something in lieu because I wasn't doing my bit that females are meant to do. I was working instead. But going right back to my first experience of in the workplace, it's not sexual harassment, but it's discrimination. I was in the honours year and I did very well. There were only 12 of us. I graduated honours. Treasury was one of those departments that was considered to be way up there. A group of us went down, the blokes and me, to be interviewed by John Stone, who was then the Secretary of the Treasury. And I was offered a job, but at 75% of the rate of my male cohorts. And his comment was, oh, but you'll have a lovely social life. And my mother told me, because that was in Canberra, we were living in Sydney, that steam was still coming out of my ears when I arrived back home in Sydney. And did I take the job? No way, Jose. And I think, was it Joe said, in those days, it was really easy to get a job. I was offered lots of jobs, so I had no problem getting a job. It was not an issue. And really, I've got to say, throughout my whole life, to date, it has not been an issue. And I know it is for a lot of people. But I was a single mother, so I left that husband that I was talking about when my boys were quite small. So one was 3 and one was 5. So, and my grandfather died and my grandmother came to live with us as well. So here I had a job, 2 small children and a dependent grandmother. And my perception always was, well, yeah, I mean, this is what you got to do. So you get on and do it and you find the job and you make it work. And, that's how life was. And I know that is still the story for a lot of people. They have to cope with all sorts of stuff. I'm lucky. I've sort of always had this half full mentality, or perhaps 3/4 full might be a better approach, and a lot of self-esteem. And I think that just helps enormously. I also had incredibly supportive parents, and that was just amazing backup. And I didn't ever really come across harassment, but I've had difficult bosses. I mean, I think all of us have had difficult bosses, and they've been female just as much as they've been male, difficult bosses. But there was one boss at one stage when I was working in a division, and the previous head left, and the CEO of the organisation appointed a mate of his who was totally male, who was totally incompetent in the role. And so I've got to say I was the instigator, but we as a group, we sabotaged this guy. We really made things as difficult as possible for him. And the CEO came to me one day, and this was an interesting insight, I thought. And he said, Kerry, you're the natural leader of the group. Please, can't you just make it work for John? And we didn't. And John left. And then I did become the formal leader of the group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yes, calling it out is so important,
Yes.
So important.
And having the support to call it out.
Other younger women in the workplace that you can call this sort of thing out.
Yes.
You can. But I mean, my career has spanned, a time where I had no fear of changing jobs. I've done many, many things. So I didn't feel, and I don't have children. So, and I didn't buy an apartment until I was well into my 50s. So I didn't have all those ties that you needed. I changed a lot. And I know that that's hard for people to do. I understand that behind.
So like the women try to be assertive. Some people think we're pushy,
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, I wasn't often promoted. I mean, I went for jobs. So I did my own thing, and I didn't have children, so I could, I mean, I had parents that I was responsible for, but there was a great freedom in that, a different sort of freedom.
But you created your own, Jo. You've always marched to a different drummer. And
I give that to my mother to show. My mother showed me how to do that. Despite the fact that she had 6 children, she taught me how to stand up. And also a very supportive father regarding career.
Okay, well, look, let's just move on now. So just say, you've all been in the workplace for a long time. I know a few of you are retired. I think, Kerry, you're still working.
Mm-hmm.
And Jo, of course. And Ching Mei, I think, is probably still working. You are, of course, because you have a number of board positions. And so, Sandy, are you the only one who has retired or not?
I retired from paid work. I still work.
You've retired from paid work, but not for life. Because I know that you do a lot of volunteer work. And so just consider this. When you were working and as you were getting older, was there pressure on you to look younger? Was there pressure on you to sort of deny the fact that you were getting older? Because I think that's an important question, because I think because of the work that I've done in the past with mature age workers, often I've seen not overt behaviour, it's more covert behaviour around how women, for example, present themselves as they get older. And so, or did you find that nobody really cared or mentioned it or whatever? So it'd be interesting to hear what you all think.
Well, probably.
What about Sandy? Yeah.
Probably for myself, I didn't care, because I was probably a bit late in starting a career, unlike some of you who seem to, because I just saw a question pop up on the screen saying women undermine other women. And to me, it was my mother. She was very, very much against women working. So that was interesting. The other thing I might point out, CSR employed women so they could marry CSR men. That was a nice sort of thing, which I did. I conformed. But I also began to realize that without my own finance, I didn't have the power or the authority I wanted to. So I wasn't very much concerned about how I looked. I was more concerned about earning some money and getting a career. And I began to think about this. And I guess one of the hardest bits was I couldn't work for CSR because my husband was working there. And I can't believe to this day I'm just so furious about that, but that's all in the past. So then I decided,
Sandy, just to reiterate, sorry.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you went to work at CSR because there's an expectation that you as one of the women would find your husband there, but once you married, they wouldn't re-employ you.
No. Interesting dynamics, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
It is. It was extraordinary. Anyway, so I said, blow the lot of you. I'm going to go back to what I liked doing, was learn to fly. And I became a commercial pilot. And this would have been certainly not at the level that I think Deborah Wardley, Laurie is these days, but I began to, that would have been my career. And again, there was discrimination there. But if I can just tell a story, which I love, you talk about bosses. My boss there was, I flew for Hinchinbrook Airlines, and at any rate, he was very supportive, like all pilots usually are, you know, whichever sex they are. But we had to fly somebody, I think we were flying them to Dunk Island, I can't remember. At any rate, and it was me who was going to do that, and the guy wouldn't get into the aircraft. And he mentioned to the chief pilot there was a woman pilot. And he said, oh, all right. So he got another pilot out, and two of us flew him there, and he charged him the price of two pilots for flying there. I love that one. But so anyway, so I really started a lot later. And because I guess the area, and then later I became a mature age student, because my husband wasn't very keen on me going to university. And so eventually I did go around I was 48 when I actually went to university, and I looked at, again, the careers that I could become, and to me, social work. And by this time I had left my husband too, because you can see the career that's happening here. But, you know, I was pretty much determined where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And so I think when I look at those sorts of careers, I kind of wasn't concerned about how I looked. I was sort of, you know, it's me. You'll have to accept me the way I am.
I think what the point I'm trying to raise is about with women, so much is around their sexuality and their appearance, that when they're working, when they're young, they don't, you know, there is quite a lot of emphasis on it. But as they get older, it often lessens off. But it'd be interesting to see. Okay, Ching-Mei, let's ask you. Did you find that, you know, that, because I know that you have run the Taiwan Australian Business Alliance for Women, etc. So you're working a lot with working a lot with women, but also too you did a lot of business development work. Did you find that there was a pressure on you?
Constantly. You have to above. You know, it's like you are swimming. Quite often you have to look around by the side, any waves coming attack you, or a shark, and also you have to try to above your head above the water. The other thing is, but when I'm getting older, I really feel I can be myself more than when I was younger, because constantly I have to look certain way and corporate way, or doing things certain way, and in order for people to accept me as the role I'm trying to, So it is it's just part of learning that we will kind of trying to do our best to play a certain role in the society, workplace, but sometimes, you know, you just have to feel good about yourself in order to, you know, to have a better life ahead of you. I suppose, especially we're getting older, and I feel it is very, very important for younger women to pay attention to. and along the way.
Okay, Kerry, what do you think of that?
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. I mean, for me, the experience was a little bit different. I found, and it was probably a lot to do with being a single parent. I gradually became more and more feminist and left-leaning. It was just a very interesting thing because I probably started from a reasonably conservative base, and I've just, swung left all the time. I was so concerned about what was happening for women. I actually wrote a book with a co-author, The Equality Myth, which was all about strategies for women breaking through the glass ceiling. And that word is still being used. There was something I read this morning about, someone has just put a crack in the glass ceiling in America by being appointed the head of Citibank. It's still very much there. And I actually chose, after I wrote that book, I chose to jump off what I call the greasy pole and set up as a consultant. And the interesting thing, and I've sort of been consulting ever since then, and that was in my late 40s. I think it was late 40s when I did that. And what I found was, as a consultant, I am respected for what you bring to the organisation and the project that you're doing. So appearance is irrelevant. All those things sort of become irrelevant because it's all about your expertise. So in a way, I was lucky. I didn't have to go on working in that corporate setting where I could see so many problems for people coming through, particularly, and look, education is an incredibly important thing. Women who don't have the opportunity of having an education are hugely disadvantaged. They get put down in every way. There is also a thing, I'm sure, with people is that some women look somehow to whatever it is, and women, older women can attack them as much as men, but somehow they appear vulnerable. So there are women who come across as strong and they're left alone, but there are women who come across as being somehow more vulnerable. And a good example is sometimes you see in meetings and a woman will make a suggestion and it's ignored. And then later on, one of the blokes comes up with exactly the same suggestion and it's endorsed and they go on from there. And the original contribution of the woman is never happened. So, yes. They're the things that upset me enormously when I was in the workplace, and why I'm so glad to have been out of that former workplace now for so long.
I had a wonderful experience. I was a consultant I set up my own business for a while. And at one stage I was consulting for Australian Business Limited, AKA the Boys Club.
Yeah.
And Bangarra Dance Theatre. And I did 2.5 days at each. So I had to suit up for Australian business and, deal with those boyos. And I have 4 brothers, so I felt like I could. And then we race home and change clothes and go to Bangarra and have a ball.
What a contrast.
At half, a third of, even less, I don't know. And, it was an incredibly different experience. And I just loved working like that.
Yes.
Can I just say, Jo, it's interesting that you were so aware that you had to be different. You had to look different. That was really important. Yeah.
You have to play the part. I mean, I've got a degree in drama and film. So on occasion, you have to play the part a bit. I had to costume up. I had to suit up at Australian Business Limited, formerly the Chamber of Manufacturers. Anyway, and I had to dress down for Bangarra. And I learned from both, I really did. I learned from both. It was a great experience.
Thank you. Okay. They're great answers, really terrific. And we're getting fabulous response from, the people who are listening and watching this webinar. Now, what's good about being an older woman today, do you think? Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first because
Oh, all right.
I actually relish where I'm sitting at today, and I do recognise that I am, I think, extremely privileged. So, you know, I've been through rough patches in my life. You know, I had to bring up 2 children on my own. I had a dependent grandmother I had to look after. But I have the advantage of I own my own home. I am financially independent. I am very active. I have, you know, my health, cross fingers, is good. I had a scare in 2015 when I had a, you know, really bad dose of cancer and chemo and radio, but I've managed to come through it. So I'm incredibly active. I do a lot of exercise. I walk every day. I'm in the garden. I don't remember that happening with previous generations. Somehow that aging process seemed to kick in more quickly. So I think technology has something to do with that, but also that wonderful freedom. I live a really lovely, full, busy, active life, and yeah, I love the age I'm at.
Yes, yes.
And
I'm with you, Kerry. You know, I mean, I know I'm privileged. I'm white. I grew up with my family. You know, I was encouraged, but I didn't own my own place until 10 years ago. You know, I travelled around the world. I was relatively footloose and fancy free, and that taught me a lot. You know, I'm 71 in a couple of days.
yay!
Congratulations, well done.
I love life, you know, and I recognise my privilege. I do. You know, I had a good education. I'm still working a couple of days a week. They keep trying to, I think, bop me off. They like to remind me about my memory, or, you know, that I'm a bit, but I love it, you know. I enjoy life. I gym when I never used to.
And you do a lot of walking, I know, because I'm always seeing
all over the place.
photographs on Facebook.
Yeah, yes.
I know you walk every day, and you walk for kilometres, don't you?
Well, not every day.
Not every day. Oh,
I've got a friend that we walk with once a week, and we've been doing this since the start of the COVID crisis, and it's been a lifesaver. We walk all over the place, and I was never a walker.
okay. Well, thank you.
Yes.
King May, what about you?
Yeah, I think overall I am very happy when I'm getting older each day, and I also, like you know, Joe and Carrie, I do exercise to keep myself, especially, you know, since last year, the COVID and started. This is just, we have to face whatever in front of us. And I mean, I thank God now I enjoy good food, you know, good wine, and but I suppose you can. I'm sort of in the position I can feel a little bit more balanced overall, in terms of you know, do what we can under this kind of conditions, circumstances. And also I'm trying to just, you know, live the way that the life that ahead of me. And I'm very lucky because I have a grandson, and by marriage, and I never have kids my own, but I enjoy having that sort of sense of connections, and also a bunch of friends who really care about me. Overall, we just share a lot of our ups and downs, and try to pushing along about life.
Thank you. Thanks, King May. And Sandy, when I asked that question, I was always also thinking about being an older woman, that we enjoy certain privileges today that our mothers didn't enjoy, or our grandmothers didn't enjoy. And how does that apply to you?
Oh, I'm well aware I'm very privileged, I would say. Even though I'm on a part pension, I still think that I have my own home, I have my own finances, I have wonderful friends, I have people who can do things with me. But interestingly, I'm single. And that probably in my grandmother's day wasn't such a good thing, to be an older woman, to be by yourself. I think it's wonderful. I can enjoy so many things. I can make up my own mind. I'm still going on adventures. What I dream up, I just think I'm so privileged and so lucky to be able to, well, perhaps not luck. There's a certain amount of luck there, but it's also navigating a place where I wanted to live. Like when I retired, and I retired just after 65, and my reason for doing from paid work, the reason I thought of that is I have a lot of things to do. I don't know my health situation. I need to do them. And I thought of very long and hard where I wanted to live. I was working in Canberra and had a house in Brisbane. I didn't want to live in either place, so I actually had to find a place, and I found a wonderful place, little village in the Blue Mountains, and we have lovely friends around me. So again, it was this. I'm going to call it blessed, because it's a real privilege, I think, at my age, to be able to do what I want to. And I'm very blessed with my health. And again, a bit like the rest of you, I do look after that now. I exercise, I eat the right things, but we have so much access to what can make us healthy. And I think that's what, I think we're so true, very lucky to be in the time that we are. So that's what I, could say about that. Jules?
Well, I think all of you have a lot of self-determination. In other words, you can create your reality because you have enough money, and as you say, you own your own homes. And as Jo says, you probably all realise that you're quite privileged. But there are a lot of women out there who don't have all of those things.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what's one thing that government can do to make a difference for older women today? So let's look at all socioeconomic groups, and also, I guess, what OWN's about, or so what do you think the government needs to do?
Where do you want to start?
Yeah, really.
Well, Kerry, do you want to start?
Oh, well, whatever. No, it's just, this is something, one of the reasons I jumped off the greasy pole and wrote my first book is because of the difficult situation that so many women were in and continue to be in. I feel so passionately about this. Now, one of the biggest issues of all to me, as women get older, it probably applies to men as well, but I'm focused on women here, is homelessness. And homelessness, lack of financial security, which has come because they haven't had consecutive careers, they haven't built up their superannuation, so they haven't got enough money, they haven't got their own homes. What does the government do about it? I was tempted to use a word I'm probably not allowed to use on the air, but the government will only do something if there is this huge pressure put upon them. And it's just got to be a huge groundswell. The changes that have happened for women over the years have only happened because of massive groundswells, I think right back to suffragettes and Emily Pankhurst. I mean, it had to be just this huge, very unpopular, very often, groundswell going on in order to improve things. Governments don't budge unless someone forces them to get off their backsides and do something about it. And yeah, but they're the issues that worry me enormously for women as they get older. They haven't got their own homes, and they just don't have enough money because of what they've done, because they've stayed off work for a while to raise kids, not built enough super, whatever it is. They're huge problems. This is today that we've got to jump on and do something about. That's right, my bandwagon. Move on.
Yeah, Sandy.
can I, well, you as you probably all know, that the older women are the largest group, homeless people, growing group in Australia. So that's actually fact. That's happening now, and for all the reasons that Kerry has said. But I don't know, I listened to Morning Extra with Geraldine Doog, and last Saturday had a very pertinent section on housing in Australia. And the interesting thing too is the pension in Australia is set to the fact that people will own their own home. If you don't own your own home, to live on the pension is in poverty. So we're actually sending people into poverty because they don't have their own home. Now, there are many things that, you know, you could do about that. But one of the things I thought was very interesting, we haven't had a national revision of housing and policy since 1945 in Australia. That's a long time to not review anything like that. The housing ministry is often given to junior ministers who don't have a cabinet situation. I know this is big picture stuff, but it fragments, I guess, housing policy. It's spread across all sorts of government. In New Zealand, they've actually put in policies now that aren't fragmented. There are housing development, you know, policies for the whole of governments. And I mean, I know this is big picture stuff, but it sort of needs this sort of to be driven by this sort of area to come down to local governments. I mean, this is one of my passions, and I wasn't earlier involved in looking at how we could build houses, not tiny houses, small houses on a block of land. And there was local government, you know, problems with that sort of thing. That's very, you know, very basic things that you think, well, how can we do that? There are models from overseas where they've taken over whole of unit buildings for, particularly for, you know, women who are having trouble finding housing, affordable housing. So there are solutions, but it seems to be that they get stuck in government. That's my
also, yes, indeed. And also to mixed housing, you know, with old and young, and, you know, it just seems sometimes we're totally lacking in imagination, because there are models all around the world of better ways of living, which are quite affordable.
Yes.
So what's stopping, you know, Joe?
Well, Meredith Bergman called aged care the feminist issue of our times recently. And, you know, it's privatised. I've had 3 relatives that go into aged care and decided not to live. I'm sure that that's what happened, you know. You know, that's one area that really, that I'm worried about, you know, because it's facing me, you know. I can stay here. My mother was in a wheelchair. She fell in her 50s and broke her back. I bought my apartment in my 50s so that she could access it, you know. That was the determining reason. It was flat, it was easy to get to. I'm worried about what happens next, you know. I don't have kids, possibly lucky.
Yeah.
True. You know, it's you know, we've got a lot of things facing us, and we need to, like this is, Jules, you know, speak out, and
we need to
our voices being heard.
Chingmei,
I think overall that I learned from other panelists about homeless, aged care is a big topic now, aged care especially, and also 1 in 4 women really suffered. They are out of jobs, and maybe we need to somehow looking at upgrade the skills or have some sort of support in that sense for some women, not just elderly, and of course elderly is in the sense that we need to pay more attention.
Yes, there's we could
big question. It's a big question. It's a big
well, exactly, because
the Royal Commission recently said only 11% of Australia's aged care facilities is providing a high quality of care. I mean, that's atrocious. That's absolutely
it is atrocious. It is, but you know, we have to work together to find solutions that are actually going to work. And what worries me is that the current government doesn't seem to, they don't seem to have a sense of urgency. And I'm thinking, God, you know, we're an aging population. But anyway, this isn't about me. This is about what you all think. Look, finally, because we're, you know, running out of time. But
That's great.
we could be here all day. We've got a lot to talk about. But what secret would you share with younger women about, you know, well, how they should approach growing older, for example? You know, if you've got any wise words to impart, now's the time to do it. Okay, so why don't we start with you, Ching Mei?
I think don't let anybody, some other people's fears or ignorance to upset you, to follow what you're believing in, and also to enlighten your ambitions. I think just don't let other people to stop you.
No, exactly. All right. Okay, who'd like to go next?
I'll go.
Oh, go, Sandy.
Eddie, I would like to say to younger women, value your own experiences. They're yours. Don't let other people talk you out of them, because they will become your own wisdom when you get older. They are your lived experiences. And the other thing for myself, I'm going to actually embrace the phrase of old woman. I'm okay with that. I'm thinking about our Indigenous cultures, and they have elders. Now, okay, it's not quite the same thing as old woman, but I'll go with old woman. I'm fine with that. And the reason I would like to do that is that I want to explain to people that it's okay. There is another phase. I have foibles. I lose my memory in bits and pieces. I write lots of notes to myself so I can remember, but this is the way I'm working with it. So that would be what I would say.
Okay, right, Jo.
Well, my mother taught me to have a go and to be brave. And she backed me, you know, not financially, because she had 6 kids and, you know, couldn't, but she backed me. So, you know, it's really boring, but I've got superannuation and thank God, you know, I never wanted to talk about it when I was younger, but it does give me a couple of choices. Grace Tame just said recently, we're on the precipice of a revolution. So I say, make a lot of noise. Join our younger sisters in making a lot of noise and helping them. And they're going through a lot of the issues that we went through in the 60s with the second wave of feminism. This is a third wave coming through, and you know, we need to show solidarity, you know, share and help. It's critically important. We're standing on the shoulders of other women. We should have women standing on our shoulders too.
Indeed. Them's fighting words, and I agree with you, Jo. And finally, Kerry.
Yeah. Look, one of the things I feel strongly about is don't take our rights for granted as women, all the things we've achieved. Pass on the struggle stories to younger generations. You know, I'm very much about helping people to write their memoirs, and part of that to me has to be, you know, let people know, let the younger generation know, keep the story flowing about it hasn't always been like this, and it might not always be like this. Things can go backwards. You know, that's really important. I also think that as we get older, we need to be practical, plan for the future, but not become obsessed by it. It's like, yeah, try to make provision for the future and what might happen, and, you know, Joe's nursing home scenario or whatever, but not become obsessed by it, you know, just, you know, and be able to live each day. One of my granddaughters actually has a to-do list on her bedroom wall, and the last item on her list that she sees every day reads, live each day to the fullest. And I think that's like a great thing for any age. Just live each day to the fullest. And I love that one.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
So, everybody have, how would you like to finish this session? Would you all have one sentence that you could say as a way of encouragement to younger women?
Well, I think have a go. Always have a go. Just have a go. You know, you've got no idea what you can achieve. Well, you might have an idea what you can achieve, but, you know, be brave and have a go.
Right. Thank you. Sandy, one sentence.
Don't ignore financial knowledge.
Thank you. Ching Mei.
Love yourself and just do it.
Thank you. And Kerry?
There's a quote from Thomas Carlyle that was always in our school magazine. So here hath been dawning another blue day. Think, wilt thou let it slip useless away? Live each day to the fullest.
Thank you. Well, thank you, panelists. Thanks, Kerry, Joe, Sandy, and Ching Mei. Thank you so much for
Thanks, Julie.
sharing your time with and your stories. Just fantastic. Thank you. And Bev, we're with you now.
Thank you. And thank you, panelists. What a fabulous session. I know in summing up, you're supposed to take some points and reflect on them, but we need another 3/4 of an hour for me to do that. But I think the thing that I will take away from this the most is the wonderful freedom of being an older woman. Because as an older woman, and I too am 71, I love that freedom. I love the fact that you don't have to apologise for being who you are. And that is something that I would like to share with younger people. Do not apologise for being who you are. Celebrate who you are. So I would simply like to thank you all so much for this wonderful seminar. I would like to thank Julie for organising it, arranging it, identifying our wonderful guests and making sure that their voices can be heard. So from us to all of you, happy 93rd International Women's Day.
Yay!
And in spite of the challenges that we face, the fact that Women's Day has been celebrated for 93 years is certainly something to continue to celebrate. So thank you all very, very much.